All right, everybody, we're just going to bring this back here real quick, just in the interest of time for everybody. So thank you for the introduction, Frye. I'm Adam Frye. I'm the Director of Business Innovation here at WeTech Alliance. It's my role to design programs and roll them out for entrepreneurs, businesses, whether that be large or small. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Amherstburg, just a small town outside of Windsor here. I went to Laurier for school, so I was there in Waterloo for 4 years. When I graduated, I got a job at RBC where I was a senior account manager for 2 years there. Quickly realized that wasn't going to be for me, just wasn't the lifestyle I needed. And at the time, a good friend of mine, Chris Jansen, was starting a company called Textbooks for Change. And when I mean starting, I mean like basically starting. We were on top of a Goodwill warehouse at the time, and it was the three of us in a closely packed room. So much to the chagrin of my parents, I left my corporate job for this small startup, social enterprise. Over the course of the next year and a half while I was there, we were able to grow the team from 3 to a peak of 27 full-time staff. We were able to generate $1.6 million in revenue, and we were able to send 175,000 textbooks to East Africa. So when it comes to growing a company, whether that's HR, whether that's investment, sales, marketing, whatever it comes to, we're a tight-knit team, so I have an in-depth knowledge of what that's going to be like, and that's a little bit about why I'm here. So I'm going to share that story with you today, and again, I haven't been with Textbooks for Change for about a year and a half now, maybe almost 2 years. So a lot of this is my personal experience, not necessarily where they're at now or what they're working on now, but I just wanted to throw that out there as a bit of a non-disclosure. So just jumping into this, what I want to do is start by talking about the origin story of Textbooks for Change, because all of that stuff that I just said to you sounds really cool and really awesome, but there's always growing pains as you go along this journey. So in 2014, Chris Jansen, as I said, he was the CEO and founder of Textbooks for Change, went over to Kigali, Rwanda. He was over there to teach entrepreneurship through he was doing a course in entrepreneurship at Western. He then began to realize while he was there that, wow, these people are incredibly intelligent. They've got some ridiculously great ideas. The only thing really holding them back was the stuff that they were learning was out of the 60s. It was out of the 70s even. So when he came back, he was sort of thinking, how can we help these folks? How can we get these newer ideas over there? How can we get the books that we take for granted that are sitting on our shelves and bring them over? Later on that year, he was doing a fundraiser for Shinorama, which isn't as big down here in Windsor, but is huge in Waterloo and in London. And he collected textbooks from his friends, just ones that they didn't need any longer and they couldn't resell back to the bookstore. He sold them on Amazon, and that was the origin story of Textbooks for Change. It began. He started to realize that we could take these textbooks that we have, that we take for granted, really, truly we do, and we can bring them and give them to people who genuinely need them. So out of that, the vision and mission for Textbooks for Change was born. The vision is education's is a right. It's not just a privilege. The mission statement itself is to provide affordable and accessible educational material to students locally and across the globe. The reason that I wanted to highlight this particular section of the impact report that they've got right now is because it's very critical as a social enterprise for you to understand what your core vision is as well as your mission statement. It sounds really fluffy in the beginning to sort of put those types of things together, but when you have to make hard decisions, when you have to make hiring principles, when you have to decide when you're going to sell and when you're going to shift, you have to always be able to come back to these things. Why do you exist? What is it for? And write it down. And that's just absolutely critical. And it was a big part of our journey to borderline fight this out between the three of us, to this is our vision, this is our mission, this is what we're going to do. And it just allows you to come back to that in a really strong way when you have those tough decisions, okay? So how does Textbooks for Change work? We had to figure out a way that we were able to collect textbooks, not just from the Western campus, but how are we going to do this borderline globally? What was this going to look like? So we set up drop boxes across campuses across North America where students could come and donate their books. We partnered with bookstores, we partnered with environmental teams at these universities in order to find ways to put these in high traffic locations. From all the books that come in, what happens is 50% of them are donated directly to East African universities. From there, 20% of them are actually resold online on Amazon at the lowest possible price to students. And 30% of them are recycled material. They're romance novels, cookbooks. You wouldn't believe the kind of stuff that gets dropped in a university Dropbox when people are moving out. So It was really interesting, some of the stuff we saw. But as you can see, this is a model. Yeah, probably. So as you can see, this is a model that not only generates revenue, but drives a lot of impact. And again, this isn't something that happened overnight. It was something that developed as we tested and tried different methods for doing this. Really, why is the model so important, and was it always this easy? I'm going to start with the second half of that and then get into why the model is so important. We started with Kiva. So as Anushri was talking about, Kiva is a microloan repayment system. So essentially what we were able to do was take, I believe it was 10% of our profits at the time that we were using. We were actually giving them to entrepreneurs in East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa that were on Kiva in order for them to get their businesses up and running with the logic that as their businesses grow, the economy becomes a little bit better, they pay you back. Two fundamentally poor things to do in a startup: give away your money and lock it up. Very, very much so a poor idea. And number two, not having any predictability about getting that cash back. So we realized very quickly that we needed the funds to actually grow our company, and Kiva does keep those funds locked up until they're repaid. So it becomes very difficult as a startup to take those funds and reinvest them into the things that you need. So the second piece of why that wasn't particularly a good model is it's very hard for people to connect with this abstract idea of an entrepreneur running something in East Africa when they've never been there. It was really difficult to push the vision forward and people to understand exactly what was going on because they had never experienced anything like that. So we flipped it. We realized, okay, we don't need to give the money to these folks. What we can do is we can take these books that have insane amounts of value, insane amounts of shelf life, and we can actually ship them over if we get 25,000 of them. So how do we get 25,000 textbooks? And thus began the Dropbox expansion. So as you can see, how you do things is absolutely critically important, but it's not always easy. It's very hard to get these things up and running and started. I always like to say, starting a business and running a business isn't really that complicated. It's just really hard. And what you're going to find is, as you go through this journey, there's going to be logical decisions you have to make, and then there's going to be really difficult decisions that you're going to have to make. And going back to that, again, your core vision and your core mission is always important at that point. Now, why is this model so important? Why is it important that when we get these textbooks in, that we send 50%, that we sell 20%, and that we recycle 30%? Well, if you can prove that your business is sustainable and makes money, you can then go and get more money to grow your business. It becomes a lot easier to do so if you've got a model that works and that makes sense. And again, I'm speaking for myself, but I prefer to build a business and then make impact with what that business does. That, to me, is the way to create a sustainable social enterprise. So I'm going to go through a few things that Textbooks for Change were able to leverage because of the ability to have a model that was sustainable. Verge Capital, obviously, Lena and Lynn were huge proponents of what we were doing. So they gave us some early debt investment. We were able to pay that back to them. BDC has a social enterprise fund. The Business Development Bank of Canada, their core mandate is to help grow small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. So they're allowed to take a little bit more risk as long as you've got a little bit of backing on that. Angel Investors Ontario, we were lucky enough to have GTAN, the Golden Triangle Network, I believe, Angel Network, jump on board and fund us as well. This is a great alternative or a great starting point if you've proven that your business model works. You can go to an angel investor, make a pitch, have them invest in you for percentages of equity. It was something we were able to do. And of course, the Government of Canada, through various grants, are what really got us started. We were able to leverage some employment grants and a whole bunch of different grants for shipping the books overseas. So those were really four main ones. Now, when you talk about social finance, it's really important to note that what this really fundamentally is investing in things that are going to move society forward. So whether that be environmentally, socially, you're solving a systems problem. It's a little bit different than your traditional investment models where they're purely looking for that 10x return immediately. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Any questions on social finance at all that I can touch on? No? Okay, we can get to that afterwards. So when it comes to measuring your impact, I'm going to go over Textbooks for Change's impact model. And I'll talk a little bit about how we measure things. This actually might not be a bad time to hand this out as well. Yep, let's pass them around. And we can share here. So this is Textbooks for Change's impact report. It's something that you can, I think it's actually upside down. The Textbooks for Change is the main spot. So really importantly, number one for the impact model, we collect textbooks. Everybody, as I explained, knows that. Sort through the textbooks in the warehouse, designating 50% to go to East Africa. You match them with the school that needs the books. You ship them over when you have 25,000, and then you work with the schools to ensure that the textbooks are distributed and available to students. Now that all sounds rosy and fun and great. Every single part of that was incredibly difficult to figure out. One, how the heck do you collect textbooks from students when they paid a lot of money for them and they're going to donate them to you for free? Number two, when you're sorting textbooks, there's very specific books, very specific needs, very specific courses that actually correlate with Canada and East Africa. So we needed to actually send an East African, we had an East African ambassador that we'd send over for 6 months. His job was to work with universities to develop these book lists. What exactly can we send you that you can use? And that way when they came in, we're able to scan them and say, okay, that's one that's on the list. Put it in this particular pile. And that way when we got to 25,000, we were able to send an entire shipping container over, which costs about $9,000 and takes about 35 days to at least just get to the port in Kenya. From there, they have to actually be taken on a truck over to all the universities. And that final access part is something that we learned a ton about the first time we sent a shipment. The first ever shipment that we sent over to, I believe it was Moy University, was a really exciting time for us. We finally had 25,000 textbooks. It was unbelievable. We couldn't believe that we had a shipping container. Somebody had sponsored it for us to send over, and it had just landed in Kenya. So in the summer of, I believe that was the summer of 2016, we went over to actually take a look at the impact and say, let's go take a look, see how amazing this is, see how excited everybody is about these. And we got to this library in Moy University, and their capacity was 3,000 textbooks. That's all they could handle inside their library at the time. They still had our books in boxes, and it had been 8 months. And they looked at us and they were so thankful. It was 550,000 US dollars worth of textbooks that we handed to them, and they couldn't use them. So my point in all of that is it's not good enough just to do something. You have to do it the right way. You have to understand the bigger impact of what you're doing. Were we displacing different types of industries inside of East Africa by sending these textbooks over there? What did that impact look like on their economy? When we sent them to universities, how easy or hard was it for them to actually take these books and get students using them? Did we have proof that the students even used them? It becomes infinitely more complicated when you actually start to do things. So first of all, do them, but have intention behind what you're doing, obviously. But really go and find your impact. Somebody that you're helping, go and talk to them after you've actually sent them something or done something for them and say, hey, did that work the way it was supposed to? Could we have done this a better way? And if so, take that back, redefine your model, and make it better. It took us a good probably three shipments of textbooks, so like 75,000 books by the time we actually got an East African ambassador who was living there 6 months and living in Canada 6 months. And at that time we exploded. I believe they're now up to 8 or 9 university campuses, if I'm not mistaken, in East Africa that they're shipping these books to. So it just takes a long time, but it's really important to do. Now, there's a couple other really interesting points for measuring your impact that I really encourage people to check out. Both of these are for sure further along in the journey of a social enterprise. They're not a startup mandated thing. The first one is B Corps. So registering yourself as a B Corp is essentially saying that you're using business as a force for good. They have an audit that they make you do every 2 years to prove that you're actually doing what you say you're doing. So for us, for instance, this was a monstrous piece because people were giving us textbooks for free. It was value. And we were saying we're sending 50,000 or 50% of these over to East Africa. Well, how else would anybody know? So we were very transparent, obviously, in our impact reports and what we do. But B Corp allows you to sort of have this leverage of saying, look, somebody's looking at what I'm doing. It's proof of it. Not to mention it's an incredible movement. And I believe there's already over 1,500. Is there more now? Last I checked. Is there over 2,000 now? 2,000 B Corps around the world, and some of them are massive. Ben & Jerry's, I think, was their big land, but it's fantastic. The next piece is Symmetrica. So when you start to define what they call an SROI framework, or your social return on investment, once you have a sort of a database of the metrics that you're using to measure your social investment or your social return, Symmetrica shows you how to actually create reports on that framework. So they'll work with you to develop a social innovation library, to work on the dashboard that you've got on your own. And then you can actually process these reports. So even at Textbooks for Change with 2 years of data, we weren't necessarily where we needed to be for Symmetrica, but it's a fantastic resource for those once you can get a high level of impact moving. So those are two really important things in terms of measuring impact. And again, what I really want to reiterate is the impact you make isn't just awesome for society. It's not just that you're making these big system changes. It's probably also your biggest marketing tool. And as callous as that may sound at times, it's really important that you sell people on what you're doing, because that's your advantage. That's why you're different than everybody else, and why your company should be funded, or why you should have more partnerships. Use that stuff, capture it, whether that's short videos, whether that's white papers, whether it's an impact report like I passed around to you. Start to capture those things and start to use them. Okay, so this is the part where I go through a couple of things that I wish I know, because I know a lot of you are in that founders program for EPIcentre. So a couple of really, really important points that you should know when you're starting your social enterprise. Cash is absolutely king. Make money and then do good. That's my mantra. It's not necessarily one of anybody else's, but if you can actually build a business that works and runs, and then you do well with the profit that you're making, or with the offshoot of how your business runs, that's the goal. But if you run out of cash, you have no more impact. So if you don't have a business that stands alone on itself, your impact is gone the minute the cash is out, which means you can't help anybody anymore. It's incredibly important that you know this and you learn or get a mentor that shows you how to manage your money properly. Number 2, grant money helps you get started, but it will kill you shortly after. It's really important for people to know this, because we took on a ton of grant money early on, and it did help us get off the ground, truly. But again, going back to that first point of cash is king, if you don't have any revenue coming in, you're never going to survive off grant cycles. Some people do, and they do it very, very well. It's very difficult to do. You're competing every year. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's hard to project out 3 to 5 years. It's hard to gain investment if everything you're doing is based on bringing outside money in, not to mention we're in a bit of a political landscape where we may have a shift here, and that grant money may just disappear. So again, in the beginning, it's okay. Bring on the grant money, get yourself started and funded, but as soon as you possibly can, wean off of it and start to grow your business organically and really solidly build that base. Build everything with intention and write it down. One of the biggest things we learned when we were hiring people, we went through this massive hiring spree. We hired like 8 people in 4 months. It was a terrible decision. But one of the biggest things we learned was, if you have a sales process, a marketing process, a social impact model, write it down. Create a framework for it so that you could hand it to a 5th grader and they would understand it and read it and be able to do it. Because what's going to happen is, as you grow your team, like we did, I mean, we literally 2x'd our team in 8 months. When you do that, you no longer are in control of the front line. You're not the person making the phone calls. You're not the person designing the social media campaigns anymore. You're not the one that's actually directing or interacting with anybody. So if your thoughts aren't down on paper and there's no process there, then there's no intention with which any of your hires can do anything. It's very, very important. It's a really, really lengthy exercise to do it and get it right, but it's 100% worth it. Make them living documents. Ensure that you're going back to them at your executive meetings or quarterly meetings or yearly meetings, whatever. Just make sure that it's there for everybody to know. Team is everything is the 4th point. So one of the best things we ever did when we had that first round of hiring, we were hiring for 4 positions. We needed a CFO, a director of a director of impact. We needed a sales hire, and we needed a head of operations, East African operations. So we hired for each 4 of those. We put job postings out for the 4 individual ones. And what we realized very quickly was, aside from the CFO, who was a slam dunk, he was this ex-executive at a big company, and he had retired, and he was a perfect fit. So the other 3, though, none of the candidates were particularly good for the operations or the sales role, but we had incredibly strong candidates for the social impact role. So what we began to realize was, maybe if we had these conversations with people and said, look, we want you as part of our company because very clearly you identify with what we're trying to do, you get it, you want to be a part of it. Are you amenable to trying out sales? Are you amenable to be marketing? If we sent you to East Africa for 6 months, do you think you could do it? What would that look like? And as we had those conversations over and over and over again, we began to realize we have to hire these people. No matter what, we got to get them in here. They're part of our band, our tribe. We need them. And then we taught them the skills that they needed from there. And every single day they came in, literally the whole year and a half I was there, and they just crushed it. They knocked it out of the park. They were there for the right reasons, whether it was really hard, because guess what? Sales sucks. It's really hard. You've got to learn it and you've got to love it. But we had people who did, and they tried their best every day because they really believed in what we did. So really focus on hiring on that culture skill set first if you get the chance to hire. It's very important. The fifth one is one that I think is the downfall to any startup who doesn't cross the chasm or make the gap jump. If you don't have emotional intelligence, your business is going to fail. Period. End of story. And you have to practice it. It's muscle, just like anything else. If you can't have conversations with somebody in a healthy debate way, knowing that you're both working on the core of your business and you're both trying to do everything you can to make that best decision, and after an argument leave and say, okay, that was great, you're in trouble, because those conversations are going to happen. You are going to have arguments. You are going to have disagreements and difference of opinion, but you have to be able to be emotionally intelligent enough to separate the personal from the actual business part of it, and then empathize with what other people are saying. Why are they coming to you with that point of view? You understand that you're on the same team. You're trying to accomplish the same goal. They're clearly just coming at it at a different angle. But if you're constantly putting up barriers, you're not making connections with your employees, you're not doing the right things to have healthy conversations, the whole entire company will not work. It's just going to be this deeply rooted, really poor culture. And this is really what it comes down to, is that emotional intelligence piece. It's absolutely critical. So those are some of the things I truly wish I knew, and I hope that you take some of those and use them in your work life. Some of the books I wish I had read, some core reading that I think all of you should read. I always like to leave with a little bit of tangibility here. Lean Startup by Eric Ries is going to teach you how to build, measure, and learn very quickly, how to interact with your customers, how to ask the right questions, how to develop a minimum viable product. This is essentially the Bible for startups. If you haven't read it, read it tomorrow. It's very short. It's an awesome read, and it's going to help you. Emotional Intelligence 2.0, I just went on a rant about emotional intelligence. It's absolutely critical. Travis Bradbury is probably one of the most well-known leaders when it comes to this in the space. This is a great book, not only because it teaches you about emotional intelligence, but it actually gives you workbooks inside of it to practice it. So like I said, this is a muscle. This isn't something you just read a book about and then you get it. You have to actually do it. You have to try to have these conversations. It's really important. The last one is by Ed Catmull. This is Creativity Inc. It's the origin story of Pixar and the culture that they have there. I know that maybe you know this or not, but it's a legendary culture. They've pumped out incredible product over the last 20 years. There's touch points from Lucasfilms, from Steve Jobs at Apple, and Ed Catmull just talks about how he built this culture, this Creativity Inc. culture. And it's just a great read, probably one of the best business books out there right now, I think. So that's it from me. Feel free to connect anytime you'd like to. If you have questions now, I'm more than happy to answer them, whether that be about the journey or any questions that you have. And if there's anything I missed, let me know, and I'm happy to speak to it.
No, you're good.
Okay, good, yeah.